How's it going, guys? It's Kass. As always, if you've been enjoying my content, then hit that subscribe button. So in today's video, we're going to be talking specifically about the pacing of gearing in Shadowlands and why I think it is a very good thing for the gearing to be the way that it is. When we start to look back at expansions like BFA and Legion that had access to bonus rolls and Mythic Plus, it basically got to a point where if you got a good enough group together in the first couple of weeks, you would get to a point where you're in full normal to almost heroic level gear just because of Mythic Plus. After one or two clears of the raid, you were basically at a point where you were either done with the progression of that character, or you were already looking for just weekly upgrades from the chest itself. And while at first getting an abundance of gear feels very good, for a player specifically that continues to play throughout the expansion and doesn't just quit after they get heroic level gear, it does not feel good to consistently be farming out 15s every week and only praying for Titan Forge instead of just getting access to better gear. I think that's something that the system in Shadowlands is going to be very good at, is every single week from the Great Vault, we're going to have access to options that will hopefully lead to us getting a significant amount of better gear, not a significant amount of worse gear that we were getting much more of, like in BFA and Legion. I think for the overall pacing and health of the game, it's much better to have a slower progression of gear, just because it will lead to a lot less gear inflation and make it so the people that have less access to the higher item level gear will still have more chances to get into groups. I think that's the biggest thing, is if you miss the first couple of weeks in BFA when a new patch came out, the likelihood you would get into any level of Mythic Plus keys was very low. People were already looking for item levels higher than the normal raid after a couple of weeks, just to get in keys that weren't even dropping upgrade gear for them. I think the changes specifically to Mythic Plus will just help the overall health of the game. When we think back to BFA, it basically was a point where you didn't even really have to do the raids to get access to the best possible gear for your character. And while I think Mythic Plus should bring some aspect of good gear upgrades for characters, I think realistically the end all be all should be raids or PvP. And while I understand there's a lot of people out there that like to only do Mythic Plus, you're still going to be able to get to the point where you're incredibly strong and you have access to very good gear just by clearing 14s consistently throughout the expansion. I think realistically, the way that the gearing system will work now is it'll be basically all based off of the vault, and the amount of time that you put into getting a better vault will lead to better gear overall, which honestly is a much better system than just doing one Mythic Plus 15 and then praying you get a Titan Forge with a socket. And that's really what every patch turned into in BFA. After you got the base level gear that you needed to get access to 14s and 15s, it turned into, hey, let's do 115, let's get it done fast, let's wait until next week, see what we get in the box. If we don't get anything good, we do another 15, we stop playing the game for the week, we check the box. It basically made it a much less healthy cycle where you were just honestly hoping for the slot machine to hit in order to get upgrades. Whereas now, it'll feel much better to get upgrades from the chest because there's a lot more options that you can get. And with just the general pacing, it'll take a lot more time to get to that perfect best in slot pieces. And I think with the removal of Titan Forging in general and the removal of sockets on some pieces of gear, it'll just overall make the progression of the game feel a lot better and be a lot more healthy overall. I think we're going to see a lot more players playing consistently throughout these patches than the amount of drop off that we had after the first few weeks in BFA. This also means, and we've already seen this with the amount of heroic clears that higher level guilds have done, that there's a lot less access to gear pre-raid that make it so the content isn't just trivialized by gear. So you have to really have a good understanding of both the mechanics and also how to play your classes with less gear than you would normally have in those situations. This is another thing that is much better for the game overall and will lead to just a much healthier environment for players to thrive in. When you go into a raid knowing that there is a chance that you won't clear the whole thing, you actually feel progression, and killing the bosses actually feel good. When you go into a raid knowing that you're just going to one-shot face roll everything, it turns into just give me my loot and move on, and not really any impactful situations inside that raid. And while wiping a bunch of times on a normal or heroic level boss may not seem like that fun of a situation, the payoff when you kill it is actually much better psychologically for the player. And I think as long as there's a change in the player dynamic and the player's thought process on how gearing actually works in the game will be much better off in the situation that it currently is. I think the amount of gear that we have access to and the amount of things that we can do to get access to that gear is in a very good spot. When we start to think about the PvP system, I think the PvP system is very good. However, I do wish that the trinkets actually worked for the damage reduction portion of versatility as well. That way it'd make versatility the best stat in PvP and also make it so PvP gear is just the best option for PvP. When I think about PvP gear, I want something that's going to feel very strong in PvP but still be able to work very well in PvE. If versatility isn't like the best stat for classes in PvE, but it's like the second or third best stat, then we get to a point where the PvP gear still feels good. You can still use it in PvE situations, but you still have access to get upgrades in PvE for PvE. I think that just generally works better for the game as a whole. I think the pacing for PvP gear is very good right now. I hope that the vault is going to drop specific PvP gear if you finish your PvP cap or that portion of gear, and not just drop a random piece. As long as that's the case, I think the general gearing path through PvP only will still be a relatively viable option for those of you that just want to play PvP. Realistically, I think these gearing changes are extremely positive to the overall health of the game. It'll lead to people playing the game more consistently throughout the expansion. It will lead to people getting access to more content throughout the week, not just doing their 15 and logging off, not just doing their heroic raid clear and logging off, not just progging in the last few mythic bosses to get their final pieces and logging off, not just getting their conquest cap and logging off. You know, all of these things that are just very unhealthy patterns to playing a game. Realistically, it's much better to have players playing consistently throughout the week than just doing as much as they can on one day and then coming back the next day or the next week to hope that they get an upgrade in the chests that they have. I'd love to hear you guys comment about the system so far. At first, I was pretty annoyed by it because I did a few mythic pluses and got nothing from it. But then I realized the amount of time that I put into that mythic plus was less about the gear specifically and more about the experience of clearing it and getting to a higher Raider IO score. I think those systems are going to be more what dictates the players that get access to high level mythic plus than item level specifically, as long as the item level ranges are close. As always, if you liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't like the video, F5 refresh, try it again, maybe like it the second time. Have a good one.